In 1987, DJ crew Newmarks from Annapolis, Maryland released a follow-up to their minor hit, Rhyme So Deaf, a rap track that had received national airplay in the USA.
Have you ever heard Rhyme So Deaf?
The new track was based on music written by local musician Bill Petaway, who worked at a gas station to get by. He developed the song with the other members of Newmarks who produced the beat, adding sample drums and stabs and giving it a similar sound to Rhyme So Deaf. The finished track, Girl You Know It's True, was released on Studio Records, and although it didn't have the same success in the USA as Rhyme So Deaf, it became a hit in the clubs in Germany. It wasn't long before Frank Farian heard the track and began working on his own version. He started by copying the drum beat hit for hit. His studio was equipped with all the latest drum machines, synthesizers and audio processors, so by the time he had finished copying the music, it sounded much bigger and heavier than the Newmarks original. Next, he hired Linda and Jody Rocco, twin sisters from America now living in Germany, to start laying down the vocals. He played the Newmarks track in the studio for the Rocco twins to copy. Brad Howell and Charles Shaw were brought in to record the other vocals on the track. Charles Shaw performed the rap, and Brad Howell sang the chorus. Farian finished off the track and he knew he had a hit on his hands, but he didn't think the session singers had the right look to front the project. For 10 years he had sung vocals for Boney M and Bobby Farrell had mimed to them. They sold tens of millions of records and played concerts all over the world with nobody ever scrutinising them. The only objections came from Farrell, who went along with it for most of that time, so Farian decided he would try the same formula again. He instructed talent scouts and model agencies to find him suitable candidates to front his new project, much like when he was recruiting for Boney M. Finding people to front the project was only half the problem. Farian also had to deal with the session singers, whom he'd largely kept in the dark about his plans for the project. Brad Howell was 45 when the song was recorded, and was already an accomplished session and touring musician who had played for an array of major artists like Madonna, Lionel Richie, Cher, Tina Turner, George Michael, Janet Jackson, and Bruce Springsteen, to name just a few. Howell had no objections to somebody else fronting the project and miming to his performance. Charles Shaw, on the other hand, was just 28 years old at the time and had aspirations of being a pop star in his own right. He would prove to be a problem later. Robert Pilatus was born in Munich in 1965. His mother was German and his father was an American soldier. He spent his first few years in an orphanage before eventually being adopted, age 4. His adoptive sister Carmen was a keen singer who liked to sing Elvis Presley songs, often while Rob strummed along on the guitar. Fabrice Morven was born in Paris in 1966. His parents were from Guadeloupe, a French territory in the Caribbean. He moved to Germany in 1984 and soon became a regular in the club scene. When he met Rob Pilatus in Munich sometime in 1988, they clashed initially as they had dated the same girls, as Fab put it, but they eventually decided to join forces and bonded over their love of music and clubbing. In many ways, the duo were opposites. Rob was loud and outgoing, while Fab was a little more quiet and reserved. One thing they did have in common, though, and that was their ambition to be pop stars. Together with another friend, Rob and Fab started a pop group called Empire Bazaar, and they released a single called Danse. They secured some TV spots to promote the single, but it never really went anywhere. While they waited for their big break to become pop stars, they took jobs as backup dancers and catalogue models to make ends meet. Rob even managed to get a gig playing guitar in a band of Eurovision Song Contest hopefuls. Rob knew a bunch of musicians who did sessions for Frank Farian. He and Fab would play football with them from time to time. It wasn't long before they were all jamming, with Rob and Fab on vocals. They got together for a live performance at Fasching, a Bavarian carnival that takes place around the end of February or early March. It's through this performance that Frank Farian apparently heard about the duo. He either saw them for himself personally, or someone had told him about the high-energy performances that would later become the Milli Vanilli trademark. Either way, he came to the conclusion that Rob and Fab would be perfect to front his new project. He arranged a meeting with the duo to discuss his plans. They met with him at his studio, a state-of-the-art facility on the outskirts of the city. Just a few years earlier, Stevie Wonder recorded his #1 hit and best-selling song to date, I Just Called to Say I Love You, in the same studio. It would have been hard for the two young aspiring pop stars to not have been blown away by the surroundings. Gold and platinum disc lined many of the walls, and the gigantic SSL and Neve mixing desks would have seemed like something from a sci-fi movie. Frank played Rob and Fab the track he had been working on, or at least the instrumental anyway. He gave the impression the vocals still needed to be recorded, despite the track being finished already. It's likely the vocals were simply muted on the mixer while he was playing them the track. After hearing the instrumental Frank Farian had made for Girl You Know It's True, Rob and Fab didn't take much convincing to agree to a deal, pretty much on the spot. Farian signed them to a production deal. These types of deals were very common in the 80s and 90s. The producer would agree to use their resources to make recordings, and then, when those recordings are released and monetized, the producer would receive a share of the income. The income they receive can be structured in a few different ways. In the case of Frank Farian, as the person funding the project, he would own the master recordings and have the right to transfer ownership or license the recordings to a label. He was also a writer or co-writer of many of the songs he produced, so would also have a sizable chunk of the publishing for the songs. Rob and Fab were given around $4,000 as an advance, and they signed the agreement without fully understanding what they were agreeing to, as they had no legal advice. As far as advances go, $4,000 was not a lot of money by anyone's standards, but for two aspiring pop stars in their early 20s, it seemed like a decent enough amount, and the opportunity seemed too good to refuse. Farian told them he would be in touch when he needed them. They assumed this meant recording the vocals for the track they had just heard. They left the studio excited about what the future would hold. They used their advance money to buy new clothes and get hair extensions. According to Fab, they chose the long hair extensions after watching a documentary on pop culture icons like Elvis, Bob Marley and Marilyn Monroe. They noticed that all the biggest icons had very recognizable images, with the hair often being the focal point. So with their image sorted, they reported to the studio, assuming they would be recording the vocals. They were told by Farian that the vocals had been recorded, and all he needed them to do was lip-sync the words in a music video and do some promotional shows. They were horrified and flatly refused. They wanted to sing, not just dance around and mime. Frank Farian had told them they had signed an agreement that committed them to the project for 3 albums, and they were contractually obliged to do all the promotional work associated with those albums. He said if they wanted out of the deal, all they had to do was repay the advance they had been given, and they would be released from their commitments. The truth is the contract was voidable, as it could be argued that Farian had misrepresented the contents of the agreement by leading them to believe they would be singing on the tracks, and wasn't clear about his intentions until after they had signed. Any half-decent lawyer could get that contract voided. They didn't have a lawyer, or anyone advising them at all. Unable to pay back the money as they had spent it all, Rob and Fab agreed to do the promotional work for Girl You Know It's True, and then, once they had paid off what they were advanced, they would go their own way. Well, that was the plan anyway. Farian had released Boney M and some of his other music projects through German label Hansa. Boney M was the most successful band they had ever had, so it's easy for Farian to get them on board for this new project. Hansa Records were owned by Bertelsmann Music Group, or BMG, who also owned a few other labels like RCA, Ariola and Arista. The project was given the name Milli Vanilli. It comes from Frank Farian's girlfriend Ingrid, whose nickname was Millie. The Vanilli was added to the end to make it sound better, and is reminiscent of another band of that time, Scritti Politti. On the 25th of June 1988, the debut Milli Vanilli single, Girl You Know It's True, was released by Hansa Records in Europe. It was a smash hit in Germany and reached the top spot in the German charts. Despite the success of the single, at least one person wasn't satisfied. Charles Shaw had been paid around $6,000 for the rap on Girl You Know It's True, a pretty decent session fee for what seemed like either a demo or a faceless throwaway club track. Neither Charles nor the other vocalists had been told of the actual plan up to this point, so a smash hit across Europe was the last thing anyone involved expected. Shaw began threatening to go public. It's not clear if he wanted money, more recognition for his contribution, or his own project. Either way, Frank Farian was not going to stand for it, and he removed Charles Shaw from his future plans. He drafted in John Davis to record the raps for the rest of the album, but this was not the last they would hear of Charles Shaw. As well as replacing Shaw, Farian also tightened the reins. He prohibited the voices of Milli Vanilli from ever meeting the faces of the group and reminded everybody that the deals they had signed all contained non-disclosure agreements. There would be severe repercussions for anyone breaching it. Meanwhile, Rob and Fab were seemingly no closer to returning their advances. It wasn't just the $4,000 now, as they had been receiving regular money from Farian for their living expenses. They were caught in a sort of vicious circle. They needed money to pay rent and other day-to-day costs, but then needed to do more shows and more promotional work in an attempt to pay it off and get out of the deal. It's also likely that the thrill of performing to large audiences of adoring fans and the regular income that brings was hard to walk away from. For whatever reasons, Rob and Fab continued to go along with it. In November 1988, with Girl You Know It's True still topping the charts around Europe and steadily climbing the Billboard chart in the USA, Hansa released the Milli Vanilli album, All or Nothing, across Europe. 8 of the 13 tracks on the album were written or co-written by Frank Farian, which means he would receive just over 60% of the publishing. To put that into dollars, the mechanical licenses paid by Hansa to the writers of the tracks, just in Germany alone, would be worth over $20,000 to Farian. These royalties are paid when the records are manufactured before even a single unit is sold. He would later also receive royalties from the sales of the records and radio airplay. It's unclear what, if any, royalties from record sales would be paid to Rob and Fab. Their actual contribution to the audio recordings is nil. They are merely props, so aren't actually entitled to anything at all. At least 9 different vocalists are credited with performing on the album, and that doesn't include the gospel choir, the Jackson Singers, who also feature on the record. On the European release, Rob and Fab are not among the many people credited as vocalists. In fact, their names don't appear on the record at all, just their pictures. By now, the success of the first single in Europe and its growing popularity in the USA was getting the attention of another BMG-owned label, Arista. Instead of licensing All or Nothing from Farian and Hansa, they signed Milli Vanilli directly with the intention of reworking the record for the American market. Hot on the heels of All or Nothing, the second single, Don't Forget My Number, was released in Europe. And although it didn't reach the heights of their debut single, it still charted all across Europe and made the top 10 in Germany, Netherlands and Spain. It's been less than 9 months since they signed with Frank Farian, and already they had 2 European hit singles, an album climbing the charts, and a record deal with a major label in the USA. Whatever thoughts they had of trying to get out of the deal were at least getting overshadowed by the excitement of it all, if not completely blocked out. On March the 7th, 1989, Arista released the reworked and retitled Milli Vanilli album. It was now called Girl You Know It's True, as the first single was now at number 2 in the Billboard chart. Half of the 8 tracks penned by Farian were gone. Among the replacements was a Climby Fisher song and a song written by Diane Warren. This version of the album credits Rob and Fab with the vocals, something the Hansa releases never did. It's also worth noting that Arista pressing is a bit of a shambles. The track order on the cover doesn't match what's printed on the label or the content itself. Some of the parts of the artwork still say All or Nothing, the original title. The second single from the album was released in April 1989. Don't Forget My Number became their first US #1 hit when it reached the top spot on July the 1st, 1989. It doesn't matter where you are from in the world or what style of music you do, the absolute pinnacle for any recording artist is a #1 record in the USA. To reach that stage in little over a year without touring the country and with only your second single was phenomenal, so naturally, all eyes were on Milli Vanilli now. They had done many shows already over the last year or so and would still go on to do a full European and US tour, but little did they know their next performance would be the one they would be remembered for. On the 21st of July 1989, Milli Vanilli took to the stage for a performance on MTV at a theme park in Bristol, Connecticut. Partway through the performance, the device responsible for playback jammed and kept repeating the line, "Girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's," over and over and over.
Girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's. I wanted to die. It stopped. Girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's, girl. 80,000 people. Girl, you know it's, girl, you know. You know, I couldn't repeat it 15 times. Girl, it got obvious still. So I stopped, I panicked, I ran off stage. It's girl, you know, it's girl, you know. Julie Brown, who used to work for MTV, ran after me. I didn't want to go back to stage. I had enough. 80,000 people waiting. I said, I have enough. I'll quit.
MTV host Downtown Julie Brown ran after him and, after some gentle persuasion, convinced him to finish the performance. With a bit of pushing and screaming and a couple of F-words, I think, as well, I got them back out there, Brown explained. They returned to the stage and completed the set, and the audience barely seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. Either way, the show went on as if nothing unusual had happened. There were, however, many journalists in the audience and watching the broadcast who did notice and did care. Some radio and TV producers previously had suspicions that all was not what it seemed with Milli Vanilli prior to that incident. An example is Beth McCarthy Miller, director of many TV shows such as 30 Rock and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. She was a production assistant at MTV in the late 1980s. She thought it was odd that 2 Europeans with thick accents when they spoke and fairly limited English language skills could be able to sing and rap in such flawless American accents. It wasn't until this performance that the suspicions grew into more than that. 2 weeks after the now infamous incident, Milli Vanilli released their third single, Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You. It entered the charts on August the 5th, 1989, and 8 weeks later became their second US #1 record. In retrospect, The opening lyrics to the chorus seem prophetic now that we know how the next few months turn out. On September 5th, they set off on their first European tour lasting 10 weeks. Halfway through the tour, their fourth single, Blame It on the Rain, was released. The song was written by Diane Warren and gave the group their third US #1. The song it knocked off the top spot, Bad English Is When I See You Smile, was also penned by Diane Warren. Charles Shaw performed the rap on the first single but was fired shortly after it was released. In December 1989, with Blame It on the Rain still on the top spot on the charts, Charles Shaw made good on his earlier threats. He told New York Newsday writer John Leland that Rob and Fab were imposters who hadn't sung a single note, and he was one of the 3 actual singers on Milli Vanilli's hit debut album. He retracted the statement shortly after, saying it was a publicity stunt to promote his own upcoming release. Frank Farian is reported to have paid $155,000 for the retraction, and Shaw's continued silence. On January 6, 1990, they released the 5th single from the album, All or Nothing, and 3 weeks later they won 3 of the 4 awards they were nominated for at the American Music Awards.
And the winner is... What? Milli Vanilli.
Oh là là, comme on dit en français. Oh là là, like you say in French.
All or Nothing didn't fare as well as the previous singles, and although it still made the top 40, it ended the run of consecutive #1s. On February 21st, 1990, a stunned Milli Vanilli accepted the Grammy Award for the Best New Artist, beating Nena Cherry, Indigo Girls, Tone Loc and Soul to Soul.
And the Best New Artist is Milli Vanilli.
As they made their way to the stage to accept the award from Young MC and Chris Christopherson, they looked elated, but inside I'm sure it was dawning on them now it was only a matter of when, not if, the truth would come out. Surely now as Grammy winners the scrutiny would be too much? Some music journalists felt that Milli Vanilli were not worthy winners of the Grammy. Rolling Stone magazine named them the worst act of 1989 and Girl You Know It's True the worst album. However, it seemed Milli Vanilli had a completely different opinion of themselves. In a Time magazine interview in April '89, Rob was quoted as saying, "Musically, we are more talented than Paul McCartney. Mick Jagger, his lines are not clear. He don't know how he should produce a sound. I'm the new modern rock and roll. I'm the new Elvis." Fab would later claim Rob was misquoted and taken out of context, but it's easy to believe that by now Rob was starting to buy into his own hype. After the Time article was published, the tide began to turn. The record sales slowed down and the coverage in the press was less favourable. Rob and Fab are sitting in the hotel one night after a gig and they turn on the TV.
First you go out and see the latest, hottest, freshest, exciting dances, but don't do them.
No.
Do this instead. Now you are doing Milli Vanilli.
So get a friend.
Because it takes 2 jerks to be Milli Vanilli.
And remember,
Don't forget our number. So act now because we are almost out of style.
They were the butt of the joke, but it wasn't just the Wayans. David Letterman did one of his famous top 10 lists on 10 jobs Milli Vanilli could do other than music.
Top 10 new jobs from Milli Vanilli. Number 10, open law firm of Jacoby Myers, Milli Vanilli. Number 9, camp counselors in Father Flanagan's Pretty Boys Town. Number 8, Jamaican pickpockets in American Express commercial. Number 7, try to sell Ben & Jerry's on idea for Milli Vanilla. Number 6, cartoon pals to Chili Willy. Number 5, professional objects of scorn and ridicule for years to come. Number 4, fact checkers at 2020 in the buckwheat division. Number 3, even newer kids on the block. Number 2, extremely groovy fry cooks. And the number 1 new job for Milli Vanilli, who cares, just as long as we don't hear from them ever again.
They knew
After 10 minutes, I was in the studio and they made the rap and they made a song, they sing in the studio, and it was very bad.
Thrown under the bus by Farian and abandoned by their fair weather friends, Rob and Fab were left to face the music on their own. Their record label, Arista, effectively disowned them. According to one Arista employee, the platinum discs for Milli Vanilli were taken down the same day the news broke. Rob and Fab organised a press conference not long after Farian dropped the bombshell. Inside the building, over 100 journalists waited, eager to grill them on the details of their deception. Meanwhile, outside, protesters had gathered and began destroying copies of their album. Rob and Fab were keen to show the reason they didn't sing wasn't because they couldn't.
I'm in love with you, girl. perform on mine. And you're the one I think about most every time. And when you crack a smile and everything you do.
So we give this Grammy back now?
As well as the impromptu performance at the press conference, Rob and Fab went to a studio to try and prove their vocal abilities.
Girl, you know it's true.
A week after Rob and Fab offered to give back their Grammy, the award was officially rescinded.
We are taking it to our awards and nominations subcommittee the 1st of December, and they may choose to give the Grammy to the second runner-up. They may choose to give the Grammy to no one this year. They just may say Best New Artist, no Grammy given.
In the end, the rescinded Grammy was never awarded to anybody else, and this remains the only occasion a Grammy has ever been taken back. Finally freed from their contract, they no longer had to keep the secret, and they wanted to get their side of the story out. They explained they couldn't come clean due to the terms of the contract with Frank Farian, an agreement they described as a deal with the devil. Frank Farian doesn't think he did wrong by Rob or Fab, quite the opposite. I made them rich. Rob and Fab got 3 million marks, $2.1 million from us. The record companies were very satisfied. The real singers also got rich, and Frank Farian got even richer. Only Rob Pilatus wanted much more. Milli Vanilli were the subject of numerous lawsuits, often initiated by money-hungry lawyers, inadvertently proving the old adage, where there's a hit, there's a writ. Many of the lawsuits lacked merit. Just listen to this plaintiff try and explain the personal damage he felt was inflicted upon him by the deception.
When I listened to the music, I would sort of picture them singing, and because all their photos and stuff are on the covers, I sort of just associated the music with them, and that's how I looked up to them.
People are buying the singer who sings the songs. They're not just buying the sounds that are being uttered. When somebody goes into the store to buy a Milli Vanilli album, they expect to be buying an album that is sung by Morven and Pilatus, and they weren't buying that.
In addition to the refund for the cost of the album, David Stalder's mother was seeking $25,000 in damages from not just Rob and Fab, but also from Arista and even the record store they bought the album from. This was not awarded, and the case was dismissed. This is just one of 26 lawsuits that named Arista as defendants. Rather than be dragged through endless public trials and risk the extent of their own culpability being revealed, Arista offered a settlement.
Special announcement. Did you purchase or receive by gift before November 27, 1990, a Milli Vanilli recording, a ticket to a concert at which Milli Vanilli performed, or Milli Vanilli merchandise? If so, listen carefully to this important message about a pending Milli Vanilli lawsuit that may affect your rights. If you fall into any of these three categories, you are a member of a proposed class in an action in the Circuit Court of Cook County, Chicago, Illinois. A tentative settlement has been reached in this action, which is subject to court approval and which may entitle you to a cash rebate. Your rights may be affected by this litigation and settlement of this action. If you wish to be excluded from or object to the settlement, you must file and mail your objection and or request for exclusion no later than December 9, 1991. The court expresses no opinion as to the merit or lack of merit of the lawsuit. For details about your rights, call 1-800-374-2874 or write Milli Vanilli Rebate, P.O. Box 91177, Indianapolis, Indiana 46291. That address again is Milli Vanilli Rebate, P.O. Box 91177, Indianapolis, Indiana 46291, or call 1-800-374-2874.
They would refund $1 for anyone that bought a single, $2 for an album on cassette or vinyl, and $3 for a CD. Anyone who bought a concert ticket would be entitled to $2.50. Around 10 million people were eligible for the refund. Only around 100,000 actually applied. It's unknown if they ever received the refunds. What is known is the lawyers definitely collected their $675,000 fee. Most of the cases were dismissed, but the constant legal fees drained what was left of the money they had made over the last 2 years. Frank Farian announced he was going to release the second Milli Vanilli album as planned, but under the name The Real Milli Vanilli. The album, Moment of Truth, proved to be just that. It barely charted in Germany and bombed in the USA. The truth was, Milli Vanilli was greater than the sum of the parts. Despite the group's name, the only members who were involved in the first Milli Vanilli album were Brad Howell and John Davis. Jody and Linda Rocco still sung backing uncredited, but didn't perform live or appear in any of the promotional material. The group's new lead singer was Ray Horton, practically a carbon copy of Robin Fab. He had played no part in previous recordings, so it seems Farian was up to his old tricks again. This wasn't the real Milli Vanilli at all. It was simply another selection of musicians and performers Frank Farian believed would be able to sell his songs. 2 years later, Rob and Fab tried to make a comeback under their own names with their own voices. A quick look at the credits on the album shows that Fabrice had a much larger involvement in the recording. By that time, Rob was struggling with depression and drug abuse. He and Fab had indulged in many drugs while on tour, and while Fab had abandoned that lifestyle, for Rob it was his coping mechanism. The album, simply titled Rob and Fab, was released on a small label and only sold around 2,000 copies, which sounds like a complete failure until you look a bit deeper. The label that eventually signed them was on the verge of folding already. They could only afford to press around 2,000 copies. The company went bankrupt not long after the release. Had they been able to press more copies, they probably would have sold more. They had a lot of support, including Arsenio Hall.
Why didn't you sing in the first place, man? You can sing.
Even if they only sold 1% of what Milli Vanilli sold, they would have still shifted over 100,000 copies. Despite their attempts to get their careers back on track, the fallout from the scandal was proving too much for at least one of them to bear. Both Rob and Fab received treatment for depression, but the situation seemed to be hitting harder for Rob. With his dreams of a comeback shattered and reports of his family being harassed back in Germany, Rob could see only one way out. He called the LA Times in the hope of having a journalist record his last words. The operator that answered the phone could tell he was in a bad state and decided to call the police.
I could tell by his voice this man was no shape at all.
He was hanging on by his hands on this railway here. I yelled up to him and I told him no, he didn't want to do this.
We then formulated a plan where we could gain entry into room 909 next door. And once we were set in position in room 909, our station desk telephoned Mr. Pilatus' room. And as Mr. Pilatus left the balcony to answer the telephone, we then walked across the balcony into the room and detained him.
Rob spent the next 72 hours hospitalised under suicide watch. His mental state did appear to be improving. He had thanked the deputies that had saved his life. After failing to sell the real Milli Vanilli and the same music repackaged again as Try and Be, Farian decided he would try to make a Milli Vanilli record with Rob and Fab actually singing. They started work on the album Back in Attack in 1997. Rob was still battling depression and drug addiction throughout the production of the album. He was charged with assault and robbery, for which he was sentenced to 3 months in jail and 6 months of rehab. Farian bailed Rob out of jail and paid for his rehab, and they eventually completed the album. However, on April 2nd, 1998, just prior to the promotional tour for the album, Rob was found dead of a suspected alcohol and prescription drug overdose in his hotel room in Frankfurt. His death was ruled an accident. The album was never released. In the years following the death of Rob Pilatus, Fab continued to develop as a singer and songwriter. In 2003, he released his solo album, Love Revolution. He also records and performs with John Davis, the voice that he was miming to most of the time. The two met in 2014 and started a project called Face Meets Voice. As well as working on new material, Fab still performs Milli Vanilli's greatest hits.
Girl, you know it's true. Ooh, 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 I love you. Yes, you know it's true. Ooh, 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 I love you. Girl, you know it's true. My love is for you. Girl, you know it's true. My love is for, girl, you know it's true. Well.
So that's the story of Milli Vanilli, one of the biggest scandals to rock the music industry, something nobody had ever seen before that shocked everybody. Or was it?
No representative of a major record company would discuss them with CNN on camera. And here's one reason why. Sources tell us Milli Vanilli are not the only imposters in town. Milli Vanilli are not the only imposters in town.